Welcome to Grit and Gravitas with Ann and Annie, bringing you savvy, spirited stories of success. We're excited to deliver 30 minutes of inspiration, impact, and goodness. We'll be bringing you guests and friends from around the country who have very special work and personal journeys. I'm Ann Dieter Gallaher, your co-host with Annie Carnathan, and this is Grit and Gravitas. Let's go! 2025, Annie Carnathan back in the Grit and Gravitas podcast studio with an amazing, extraordinary, high gear female guest, Betsy Hamm, executive extraordinaire, a fabulous track record, and we are so excited to welcome you today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely.
Back and better than ever with Betsy. So Betsy, you and I go back a really, really, really long way. We've had a lot of stops and starts to get you on the show, and I think now timing couldn't be better because you're looking for what's next from a really stellar career, and we want you to take us through a little bit of that career because you've done so many different varied things with what essentially was one opportunity that you grew, right? Either within that organization or to the next step. And so I'm fascinated by how you're looking at what's next and how you're evaluating that day to day.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's wild because, from, I think, a lot of people's journey, you set out, you think you're on one track, you're going a certain direction, and it changes. And sometimes you're in that driver's seat, and sometimes maybe you're in the passenger seat. Maybe I feel like I'm in the back seat at times. But you don't always know where you're going, but it's just, how you get there and how you get to that next step. So, I spent the first 15 years of my career at Hershey Entertainment and Resorts doing marketing, which was amazing. Of course, it's an awesome brand, had a really fabulous team, just had the opportunity to, do everything from launching new attractions, right? To, just the job of getting people to the sweetest place on earth, which was amazing.
And a global brand.
And
so
absolutely.
What a
and an emotional connection brand, right?
Like
people love to tell you about their Hershey Park story. You'd meet people, tell them you went to Hershey Park, and they wanted to tell you how they went with their grandparents and, just what they got to experience. So, that was like such the joy of working for Hershey. But, I was kind of keeping an ear out at one point, just if there was anything interesting that was coming along. And I had a really great friend who told me that Duck Donuts was opening their corporate headquarters in Mechanicsburg. And at the time, this is 8 years ago, I had never even heard of Duck. I'd never been to the Outer Banks. But when I reached out to my girlfriends who went to the Outer Banks, and I'm like, do you know about this Duck Donuts place? They were so emphatic. They're like, you have to take the interview. You have to go. And I'm like, this is a donut concept. So again, that emotional connection that people had with the brand. So took the interview with the founder, who was the CEO, and Russ DiGilio, local guy, of course, painted this picture of this brand that people who know it love it, and they wanted to make it a national household name. And they were slowly doing that, taking it outside the Outer Banks. So as a marketing person, that's a dream, right? Like take this brand and grow it and scale it. So when I started at Duck 8 years ago, I think I was like the first outside the friends and family circle who was hired. And I came with my big corporate background and my like skirts and high heels. And they're like, who is this woman and where did she come from? But had the opportunity to not even just build the marketing team, but as I started working more closely with Russ, it was like, hey, what's your vision? Like, what do you want to do? How are we going to grow this? How many locations do you want to open? And just to help formalize and really sophisticate the brand as a company more too. So I did that for a couple, I guess really a year. And at that point, I mean, we were so small, we didn't even have titles at Duck. I was the marketing person. That was literally my title. So about a year into it, he said, hey, I want to promote you. I'm like, well, do I get a title? Like, how does this work? Again, corporate background. He's like, I want to promote you to COO. So a lot of people know they don't usually put marketing people in charge of operations, but we were small and working really closely together. So I took on that role. And I forgot to mention when I started at Duck, we had 20 locations, right? So that was 8 years ago. So started taking on more responsibility of just how do we grow and scale the company. So Russ was always pretty transparent that he was going to take the company as far as he could. And then at some point he was going to have to sell to private equity. So lo and behold, that happened 4 years into me being there right before COVID. He's like, it's time for me to sell. It's time for me to bring someone else in. I thought, oh, okay. I thought I had like another year or two. COVID hit and I thought, oh, Russ will slow down. You know, if anybody knows, Russ and an entrepreneurial spirit, they just keep going once they have their mind made up, which is what makes them successful. So went through the RFP process. And as we were doing that, and even during COVID, I had taken on more responsibility. And it sort of dawned on me like, wow, okay, Russ is already saying he's stepping down. He doesn't want to be CEO, right? He wants a more passive role, like on a board seat. Like they're going to bring somebody in to be CEO. And we have all this positive momentum and, such great things were going on. I was like, well, I don't want that to happen. Like, so there I am, raising my hand.
That's awesome.
To be
so
CEO.
Business Vitamins. So you raised your hand.
Yes.
Because a lot of people, do not, a lot of women do not raise their hands, and we want them to, and we want them to say, at least put your hat in the ring, and because not everybody knows our intentions.
Sure.
And so that's awesome. So that's a business vitamin, Annie.
It is. And just one quick aside to that as well is the similarities to HE&R where I worked, outside HE&R with you, Hershey Entertainment Resorts. And there's a lot of layers to that, right? If you know Hershey Entertainment Resorts, and you found a way to grow there, right? You found opportunity within that. And all I would see is how uber talented you were to speak into things that you were not necessarily in charge of, and that then replicated itself at Duck Donuts, because to me, that's a huge part of your skill set.
Right.
So when you sit here and go, what's next? That, to me, if you were asking for how do you see me? What is your lens? What do you see me do?
Right.
That's certainly one of them, which I think is a business vitamin, is to grow where you are.
So much. And I love that you call that a business vitamin, because I think especially when I go back to like the Hershey days, there was times when I didn't raise my hand because I just assumed, well, I'm doing the job. Like I'll just get recognized.
They'll notice
get
me.
that. They'll notice
To
me.
Anne's point, you won't.
And I can tell you more than once that happened where they're like, well, we didn't know you were interested in that. I'm like, but I'm doing it, or I'm doing
But
a
it's
good
a good
job.
example too. You're absolutely right that CMOs or anybody in the marketing team generally do not switch line roles and go up to CFO or CEO. It's a if you look
usually
across,
stay in your lane.
Yes,
usually
Fortune
stay in your ops,
1000.
marketing.
It's not really a clear path. That's another business vitamin. Is don't be afraid to jump over. Don't stay in your lane.
Sure.
Don't be afraid to explore. Well, maybe the skills I have now that I've demonstrated, I'm going to leverage, and I'm going to tell the C-suite, I think I can transfer these same skills to the executive
Absolutely.
line.
And I think it just goes to like exposure and curiosity, right? Because even at Hershey, I was in marketing, but we worked really closely with the ops teams to pull off stuff. So I had that exposure.
Right.
And I would ask a lot of questions to understand how they thought, because ops and marketing people think very differently. So I was able to sort of be able to take a step back and connect the dots. I was never an ops expert, even as COO at Duck Donuts, but I knew I had to have the good team around me, but I knew what kind of questions to ask. I knew when they were going to flip out in a meeting because I was pushing buttons, It's just understanding and learning, right? Being interested to learn outside of, I'm only a marketing person, I can only ask questions about marketing. No, ask questions about everything
and ask
else.
business questions.
Yes.
Ask strategy questions. In marketing, we have to respond to what are the business goals? Not only what are our goals, for metrics or impressions or brand awareness, but what's the business goals?
Right.
And I think you had a lot of exposure to the Hershey company, which is integrated but runs separately.
Right.
So that lens,
Sure.
and that POV,
right,
just as a business professional, illuminates so many things of the why.
Absolutely.
Right? Because
and
the
listening to what
why
they ask.
and
they
the
ask
why
questions
at
to me, and
Hershey
you're like,
is 100% the why at Hershey is what can you contribute to the kids?
Right.
Yeah.
Period.
Right.
That's the why of everyone in that organization, which is to this day staggering to me, right?
Absolutely.
How do we help kids? And so when you look at that trajectory for you, to see you develop that and keep that centric curiosity that way, because I don't think people that promote us just sit around thinking about us, right? And I don't think women do that as well as men. Men are like, hey, when I get promoted? What I got to do to get promoted? Hey, bro.
Well, and
what I gotta
often
do, right?
not even legitimately qualified.
Right.
And so,
right.
women, they just say, I'm going I'm going to think myself into this role.
Right.
And many times, and I don't want to make a blanket statement or a stereotype, but largely the women I've talked to pull back and say, I really want to do a good job, and I want the CEO to recognize that will never happen.
No.
The CEOs have a million things. You have to say, present your value either at, your yearly review or whenever. Don't be afraid to make the ask, like you said, Betsy. Be curious and say, I believe my skills can transfer into...
How would they know? Like, you're a grain of sand on a mile-long beach for a CEO. Like, how would they know otherwise?
Yeah.
So I think using words is always a good tactic.
Yeah, I mean, because after I did raise my hand, and it didn't sound as bad when I said it to Russ, but then we went to dinner with the private equity group, and they said about, their founder-backed companies, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And Russ was like, well, I'm not interested in sticking around. And they're like, well, who do you have in mind, or who's going to do it? And he's like, well, she is. And I was like, what? I'm like, who just said that out loud? So, I mean, obviously, I still had to go through a process, but saying it to him was one thing because I was comfortable with him, right? And he knew me. He knew my skill set. He knew what I had been doing for the company. But then saying out loud to people who didn't know, and I had to prove myself to was a whole different level of like, oh, did I say that out loud?
That's really good skills on the way up to the C-suite to, present in front of investors or private equity. I mean, that's a grilling.
Yes, for sure. For sure.
And I think it's probably a different topic, but I believe that when you're in a family-owned business, and I am, there is different nuances. Yeah. And there's different ways to lead. And so as much credit as I give to our majority owner, Don Young, Rick Jones, the ownership group, it's super difficult for them.
Very.
Because it changes the meaning of past the potatoes when they're talking about an outsider, to your point. You were an outsider to Duck Donuts. And it's tough for them to have trust and faith in that.
Right.
To do things that aren't popular when they're hearing about it from the people they love the most.
Well, both of your companies, Duck Donuts and Universal, are very similar.
Yeah.
Yes.
Duck Donuts had almost the entire family.
Yes.
Gary, you had the whole slate.
Everybody was.
And Universal too.
And the admiration. I mean, it's so there are nuances. There are politics, for lack of a better way.
But there's loyalty
to
too.
Navigate that infrastructure. There are just some people that are immovable, and other people it's around, under, over, through, whatever you're going to do to navigate that. But I just have a tremendous amount of respect for Russ and especially for Don, who had to deal the most with me, because there's absolutely no way that was, and really Don's wife, Annie, who I'm very close to this day, to be able to navigate that. So good for you and good for them.
And for you too.
Yes.
And the other piece that you're forgetting with that is, and you were in the same situation, is the brand or the company's growing so quickly, right? I mean, Universal grew so quickly once you were involved too. So it's that growing brand where things change, and the structure has to change and the people have to change. And, that's really hard. And that was probably one of the hardest parts at Duck, was just the people piece, because, it got you to 20 locations, wasn't going to get you to 200 and structure changes. And that's hard. That's hard to have those conversations, especially when you're at a smaller company versus if there's 1,000 people. I mean, it's still hard, but a little bit different. But, we're in those smaller, under 30 employees at the time that just make it very personal, because there is such loyalty.
Talk change. I don't care who you are, what you are. That's a tough word to navigate.
Yes.
Change.
Yep.
And of that magnitude, because you're right, you're trying to manage the scale. And for the longest time, I managed the company, the scale, the people, the family, everything about that, and was acquisition and was bringing accounts in. And sometimes we were over our skis.
Sure.
Right? We just were outpacing our acquisition to our infrastructure.
Yeah.
And you're hanging on for dear life at that point, and it's very, oh my gosh.
And you're trying to predict what's coming next and how fast it's going to grow, and when you need to bring more people in because you don't want to get behind. So it's a lot of
And now that there's a president, I don't know how I did it, the day-to-day with, everything else. And so I just think that, and you're right, there are parallels as you sit here and listen and know both of us well, right?
I think we commiserated at lunch somewhere along the line.
Oh my goodness. But I think too that we talk about that all the time, the ability to have someone in your tribe
Sure.
that's going to sit there and tell you the truth.
Right.
And we have done that. And now that you're looking back and you have that little bit of luxury to figure out what's next.
Right.
How do you do that?
Yeah. So it's been fun. So yeah, I was in the CEO role for 4 years, which was awesome. And again, just never, we opened in 9 international countries and, almost 200 locations in 26 states, and just had the opportunity to really be part of something very awesome. And I took over for the founder, right? Which I don't take that for granted.
Right.
As I, wanted to make Russ proud, and I wanted to
a
make
big
sure
baton,
it's his,
that
reward that decision,
heading in the
right?
right direction. Yeah. So it was an awesome 4 years, but it was just time for the next chapter, really, is how I'm framing it. It's kind of open, right? And it kind of goes back to what I said in the beginning, where I never set out to be a CEO of an international franchise company, right? Like, that would have been crazy if somebody would have told me that 10 years ago. I'd be like, that doesn't sound like anything I would do. So, as I have this opportunity to work on some projects, I'm involved in some other brands that I just haven't given the time and attention to, with the local ice cream concept. So have some projects that I can now focus on and get that started. And then I think really where my wheelhouse is going to be is helping other emerging brands. That was the really fun part of the job, is working with Russ and working with the founder to scale the brand. So I've been talking to a few people who I've had relationships with in the past that are in franchising, and they're founder-led companies, and going in and being able to help
being a consultant or opening your own business?
Yes. Yep.
Good.
Yep. Consulting and opening, or helping them open more locations. And I feel like the second, third, fifth time will be way easier than the first time.
Betsy, right?
Yep.
Fractional is
Yep.
a really hot buzz in a gig economy. You can be a fractional CMO. You can be a fractional COO, as long as you have boots on the ground there to implement it, but you're helping the leader or the CEO or the think.
Right.
And time to think, I'll at least speak for myself, when you're doing so much in the thick of it every day, is extraordinarily difficult.
Yeah.
So if someone can freshen you, give you fresh eyes, sort of make you see things warts and all that you just can't see because you're in the battle, I think that's a tremendous benefit.
Yeah.
It's almost like grandkids.
Outside perspective,
you just
right?
enjoy them and give them back.
You definitely have that outside perspective that you can bring. So, so I'm excited about that. And, I think that's another thing that I find has been really important through my career, is just relationships, right? Like, I actually got the job at Hershey because of a relationship. I got the job at Duck because of a relationship. And now building this business, it's all based on relationships.
Right.
I mean, I've had, people reach out to me, or like, hey, how do we work with you? How can we make this happen? And it's because I had relationships with them in the industry. So I just think that's really important. No matter what area you're in or what level you want to be at, it's just having those relationships with other people, whether it's to get a job or to know what's going on, or, to your point, to be able to talk to people and bounce ideas off of people who are doing what you're doing.
And I think the gratifying part too is for the people that are reaching out to you now, they had a genuine authenticity for how they connected with you. Right. It doesn't matter where. Maybe it was in regard to franchising, but at the end of the day, you were memorable to them for the right reasons, and they admired and respected you.
Right.
I think all of us, if they sit and think, well, who would want me? What would I do after this? Right?
Yep.
That's the part where it's an unintended consequence that's spectacular when I listen to this. It's really flattering and gratifying.
Definitely.
Well, it's an opportunity for you, especially if you're going to start your own business, is to build your brand.
Right.
Separate and distinct from two global brands.
Right.
So, people know
I am the
you.
donut queen, right?
Yeah. So, how, that's kind of exciting, and you have an open slate there to really create your story moving forward in this new amazing season. And we talked, a little bit through email, Betsy, of if you could think of what are a couple tips you would share with your younger self. So it could be on resilience. It could be on curiosity, for younger women. We are by women, for women, but,
two daughters. Betsy has two young daughters.
So that's awesome. And it's required
really
listening
look
for
up to her.
Our collective 4 sons.
Right.
So they're, they still have to listen. But I think younger women especially are just craving, what is that advice, that they can't find on TikTok? That what is that piece of advice that would prepare them for future transitions, prepare them to raise their hand.
Yeah.
You know, and that's really what we want to instill.
It's
in them.
relatable, and
Sure.
I think
Yeah.
that's where teenage daughters
Oh yes, they're great.
keeps you in
humble.
context,
No,
right?
sorry.
And when I finally met one of your daughters, I was so delighted because I wanted to tell her how awesome you are.
Aw.
How uber talented, and how much I admired and respect you and watched this journey and thought, wow, right? And I'd want someone to tell my boy that.
Right,
Like,
right.
your mom is badass, right?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
so I think it's in context. Like, you're not going to sound like a boomer when you answer Ann's question about your younger self, because you have teen daughters that are in
Well, yeah.
context.
Right. So I decided that I was going to ask them what, because I give them lots of advice, as you can imagine, right? So they're 16 and 13. One is very much like me. One's very much like her dad. And so it's just kind of fun to see how they respond. So I said to them both separately, like, what advice do you think I give you a lot that I kind of like drill in? The first, my 16-year-old Kenley said, not my circus, not my monkey. She's like, you, and I was like, oh,
Yeah.
okay, which was interesting.
That's a super old saying.
right?
If you look up the
But I
origins
tell
of that,
them
it's
that
interesting.
when they get
Yeah.
like so infatuated about something that somebody else is doing, and
Yeah.
like, you know, and it kind of goes back to the whole Mel Robbins thing that she's killing it on with like let it go type of
Right,
let
right.
them is their thing. So I thought that was funny. But, you know, I think one of the biggest things that I have shared with women through my career from the very beginning, and I actually learned this at Hershey at a professional development session, was about P.I.E. So it was the consultant who came in, and she was talking about the importance of P.I.E. And what P.I.E is first is performance, right? Like, your performance matters. That's table stakes.
Right.
We all get performance reviews. We know how our performance
Right.
is. We know, like, that's, everybody knows that part. But the I is image. And I think with women, we struggle with that. And image doesn't mean, you know, wearing expensive clothes
Yeah.
and making sure you get your hair done. But it's just how you show up and what people say about you when you leave the room. So, you know, are you optimistic and a problem solver, or do you walk out of the room and people are like, oh, thank God, she's so negative, she's Eeyore. So it's just what your personal brand
Yeah.
is,
Yeah.
essentially, of how people explain you. That didn't come out.
Yeah.
But that's your image, right? And just how people talk about you. So I think that's important. And then the E's exposure. So it kind of goes back
Good.
to the
There
raising
you go.
your hands.
Yeah. Yeah.
But who knows that you exist, right? And I can think of women throughout my career and that we all have to improve on certain areas, but needed help on the I.
Sure.
But especially the E. I mean, there's been so many women who I've worked with who are so phenomenal at what they do, but nobody knows what they do because they don't, you know, sit at the table. They don't raise their hand. They don't volunteer. So it's making sure that, you know, your boss knows what you do, but
Right.
also your boss's boss and the person who's your peer and the people outside of your company. So I think having that exposure just gives you those opportunities in the future. And again, that kind of ties
Right.
into the relationship piece too, that when something does come up or you do apply somewhere, they're like, oh wait, yes, I know her. I've seen her.
I've seen her everywhere.
Yeah. I've heard good things about her, you know,
Right.
like, oh, I've
It's
heard she's a
momentum.
hard worker.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that P.I.E, I think, is important.
No,
and
that's great.
I actually tell
Another
that to
business
the
vitamin.
Oh,
Yeah.
thanks. And I tell that to the teenage girls too, right? And they get a little annoyed with me. But even like in school, you can apply that, or sports. That's, you know,
Oh,
where I really talk
absolutely.
about that.
Yeah.
You could be an amazing volleyball player, but if you don't have a good image
Yeah.
or you're not getting exposure, then you're not going to go anywhere. So
Yeah.
I think that's, you know, something that I have shared with women throughout my career, and I already am telling my teenage daughters.
Well,
that.
and that's where, to me, Ann and I's mission for advocacy for women is precisely that. And if I could give you the amount of times in my career I connect people and I pick up the phone and say, would you mind advocating for me with this person? I mean, it just happened with a new CMO who someone that used to be at Walmart, he knows her well. Hey, the next time you see her, present with her, would you advocate on our behalf? That's all I say,
Yeah, nice.
right?
Yeah.
And so whether they do or they don't, and that's everyone. So I'm trying to say to men, right, at the same point, who lots of times have to promote women,
Right.
have to feel comfortable promoting women, can also play an active role
Sure.
in exposure. And the room, we can always make a room better
Yep.
or not change it at all when we're in it. If you're changing it in a negative way, oof, that's tough. But you can walk into Sheets and make Sheets someone in there better that day than walking. It's as easy to do one as the other. So,
But all three parts of the pie we can control.
Yes.
The image is, you know, if you don't like your image, then change it. do some things, or gather yourself around with some trusted people to say, how do you perceive my brand?
Right.
How am I, what's the perception of me in a business, setting, or in a personal setting? Because maybe we're not clear-eyed on how we're coming across.
Oh,
so
right.
we can
Absolutely.
always,
Need some
nobody
honest
really
friends.
loves to hear the truth.
Right.
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 We don't want to come off as, with a tone that might be bitey
Absolutely.
or to be misperceived. So the image, and then the exposure, to your point, we have got to stand up. We have to tell our story. It's not narcissistic. I
Right.
can't buy the donuts, or I can't buy the media space if I don't know you.
Right.
And again, people do those decisions based on relationships.
The courageous part of that is not being afraid to hear no.
Right.
No, not now. Be prepared to say, what would it take for me to get promoted and not get
Sure.
tangible
Well,
linear
Jillian
answers?
Byerly, not yet.
right.
Not yet. That's the power of yet.
And we are our own selves. It's just like, I don't necessarily care about my competitors. I don't need to waste my time or breath talking about them.
Sure.
I mean, I can only control P.I.E.
Right.
Right?
And being resilient, because it's not always going to go your way. And sometimes you
Clear.
maybe don't
in
get
this
a job,
room,
right?
we can probably count up the times it didn't go your way.
And sometimes
Yeah.
something better happens,
Exactly.
right? I mean, there was
Exactly.
times at Hershey where
Yeah.
maybe I didn't get a promotion and I thought I should, or the job that I wanted, or, and it's just, okay, well, this isn't going down this path, so let me go over here. Let me, just sort of change. So,
Right.
So I think that's the tough part too, is being resilient, because it's not going to be all sunshine and roses, and maybe you're at the wrong position or the wrong company, and you just have to make that change to be where it makes sense for you. So
You have to know yourself to get there. And to me, it's the grit, it's the setback.
Yeah.
The
Anne's,
pivot.
the pivot, Anne's grace through that, right? So however you're dealing with that, the entirety of this podcast is to say there's grit,
Right.
and there's gravitas, there's grace, right? But most of it is in between.
Right.
And so how does that ultimately define the journey?
And your opportunity, the guardrails are off
Right.
from,
That's
exciting.
global
I love
corporations.
that.
So, the future's yours to create
that's
the
exciting.
brand, bring new people in with fresh ideas, so whether it's still in food and restaurants, or whether it's something entirely different,
Yeah.
your guidance and experiences are going to build a lot of people up.
You're going to find the people that want to contribute to what's next. Like, I am like, oh, yeah, let's
Right,
talk.
I
And how
know.
can I help? Like,
Right.
what can I tell you? What do I say?
Yeah.
Like, oh, I'm Tigger trying to bounce around, trying to help everybody. So
Yeah.
I think selfishly the time and a little envious, you get to figure out what
Right,
that
it's
is.
fun.
And
Yeah.
you're flying free, right?
Yeah.
And so it's just been a joy to reconnect. And thanks for sharing your story. And just like that.
Betsy, where can our listeners connect with you? So would it be LinkedIn?
Yep,
Are
LinkedIn's perfect.
Okay.
Yep,
Okay.
definitely.
Good. So
Definitely.
easy to find
Yeah,
there.
absolutely. And more to come for sure. What's going on in
That's-
my new journey.
Yes, that's exciting.
What's been scary to you? We do have a minute or two.
I don't know. Nothing scary, I would say. I mean,
That's
you
good.
mentioned change, which sometimes
Yeah.
it's maybe not so much change. It's just kind of the unknown. But then I also get super excited by that. So, I mean, that's the good thing of not needing structure in my life is, just having that opportunity to do something different. I
And
find
13
super
and
fun.
16, your family grounds you.
Actually, that's probably the scariest part is just dealing with teenagers on a regular basis. Not traveling right now.
Irrespective of the job.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
maybe I'm not traveling. So, I have more opportunity to be home and be
Yeah.
like, that stay-at-home mom they never had.
I think
Good.
one of the things I said to you, oh, how cool not to travel to Dubai and international. Like, oh, no, I didn't mind that. Oh, I do.
I know.
Oh,
I was like,
I
I
do.
miss traveling. I want to start, I think I'm, have somewhere I can go next month. So that'll be good. So
And I'm
I
not
love
going
traveling.
to Dubai. Like, anybody who wants to do it for me, like, you can have it. I don't want to get on a plane to go to Chicago right now, right? Ever again. So I think it's just interesting how all of a sudden, all this time availability for someone who never really
Right.
had a lot.
Well,
of
you'll
a
fill
life.
it. It'll be
Yeah.
filled pretty quickly.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not good at sitting still
Right.
or binge watching
Right.
Netflix or anything like that. So I just, I move definitely. Got a new setup in my office and it's all good.
Great. Well, we're excited to hear what your teenage daughters say, and we would love their advice too.
Yes.
So
That's
have them
absolutely right.
to send it on, like what, especially the 16-year-old. I mean, she's is 10th grade, 11th grade.
Yeah.
So she's got to be thinking about college or her next step, and
which is wild. And I think she wants to be a communications journalism major. And we should mention that there's 3 ship grads.
Three
in the room,
ship,
by the
yeah,
way.
actually.
And I mean, that's a
we
big
need
deal.
to tell. Yes.
Oh, I forgot that.
And Ship's on her short list, so I
But
can
I knew
imagine that
it.
makes me happy.
I know it. Yeah. That, and you know what? It's far enough away, but it's close enough. Right. You know, whatever that car ride is. But I have to tell you the glee when I finally met Kenley, right? As like a human, like functioning, working, and I was like, let me tell you about your mom, right? So
She's texting me, oh my gosh, I just met your friend Annie.
and Betsy spoke to her younger daughters.
8th grade
Middle,
class.
fun.
middle school
like
class.
a career day.
Well, it was sort of, yeah. It was right before Christmas, and it was like 300 and some 8th graders. So that was honestly the most intimidating audience I've ever spoke to. I'm like,
they can be brutal.
3,000 adults.
Yeah.
I'm good. Like 300 8th graders who knew there was donuts on the other side of the door.
Well, there you go.
Yeah, that was good. That was fun though.
That's the greatest thing ever.
Yeah.
Betsy, I can't thank you enough for finally coming in, and that's again on me, the stops and starts, but thrilled for your journey.
Thank you.
Now you're part of our tribe, and there's an entire tribe
Yeah, there is.
that would do anything they could do to help you at any point, and we can't wait to connect you with them.
Appreciate
So
that.
thank you.
Good. Have a high gear day. Thanks so much, Betsy, for coming in. Thanks for listening. It's our desire that these stories will bring energy, ideas, and fresh thinking that you can use today. Subscribe to our podcast and follow us on Instagram, and have a high gear day.